I ordered World of Warships. Let's take a look. That's not World of Warships. Alrighty guys, all terrible jokes aside. Nah, let's stop licking. Stop it. I have my little one right next to me, and she decided that she's going to be licking her allergy spots. I promise you'll feel better once the medicine kicks in. It's okay. But you gotta stop licking your paws, okay? There. Alright guys, all terrible jokes aside, this is my new x79 motherboard, and sorry if you can hear Nala moving around. She is very, very happy to see me. I've been at work all day. So, this was one of the cheapest x79 boards that I could actually get stateside. Now, when I mean stateside is I actually went onto AliExpress and ordered from, or I selected the ship from the United States option and ordered it. They actually didn't have a name with this one, but I can tell you that this is the x79g version 1.2. There we go, I was reading it, sorry. It is the, I don't know if this is like an anti-miner board or a machinist board or what company would have actually manufactured this board, but there is no branding on it. Like, World of Warships is the only branding on it, and it literally just says motherboard. I'm kind of sad though, this box did not fare well, and this would be a perfect piece for my wall. Up there. But it didn't survive very well, so I don't know if this thing is gonna become part of my collection. But yeah, I mean, the board looks to be in decent shape, even though the box was destroyed. Now this thing is supposedly, at least according to the ad, it can take up to 32 gigabytes of RAM. It can take whatever x79 processor I'd want to put into it. Got a 7-phase power delivery system. It does not actually have the M.2 adapter on it, but it should be able to take an M.2. It's also got a 1 PCI by 16 slot and then a 1 by 1 slot. Now, I'm assuming, I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming that it's going to be a grand total of 32 gigabytes in dual channel. I haven't looked at anything about this board yet. I'm really tempted to start Googling things to see what other people think about it. But, I mean, all in all, this thing does not look half bad. And it is a full micro ATX form factor, which is something I really liked about it. Now, I do have other motherboards coming in the mail, supposedly, assuming that they actually make it to me. But this is my first x79 board. This is actually my first time even seeing an x79 board. I've only ever really worked with x58 and the other platforms that I talked about being the FM2 and the AM3 platform. So, honestly, I really like the way this thing looks, but there are a few things that I would really like to point out right away. There is no USB Type 3 or USB 3 on here. There's no USB 3 on the back for rear connectors. It's all USB 2. But we do have gigabit Ethernet. We've got 4 DIMM slots, and we have dual SATA 3. So, I don't know. I mean, this thing is very much one of those unnamed, like unclaimed boards, but even if it is only dual channel, even if it doesn't have USB 3, I mean, it's still x79, and it'll still support the CPU. But like I said, it is micro ATX. That really excites me. As in, there might be an InWin 301 in my future. Because, I'm sorry, but the InWin 303 is one of the sexiest cases I've ever seen. But the only thing that I don't like about this board, the only thing that kind of like makes me not super gung-ho about this board is the green and black color scheme. I get it that not a lot of motherboards go with the green and black color scheme, and the whole Chinese motherboard scene seems to be a lot of green and black. But for me, I obviously am kind of like a red and black person, as you can see by my my boom arm. And sorry about the mess, but I literally just ate lunch because I just got home from work. But I'm not super gung-ho on the whole green and black thing, but if I gotta rock it, I'll rock it. I don't care. But this thing, the only things that it came with were the, what is this? The AMD mounting mechanism with the, well, you got the I/O shield, which actually does look to be proper, which is nice. A singular SATA cable in red, and also the screws for the mounting hardware, just to mount up this mounted the CPU cooling bracket, which, I mean, hey, what the heck? Feels, I mean, it feels as good as any Chinese motherboard. I mean, it doesn't feel bad. But the thing is, it kind of gives me this whole cheap vibe because it didn't come with a book. It didn't come with, like a user's manual or anything. It didn't even come with any branding on it. No one wanted to claim this thing as their own build. It might be considered like a machinist. It might be considered a, what is that, like an anti-miner? I forget exactly what it's called. I'll do some looking into the BIOS and see if it actually does have a label on the BIOS. But this is all that I got. And I'm okay with that because of the price tag. I only spent $60 on this motherboard. And that was shipping it from the United States to the United States. Meaning that when you buy one of these boards from the United States, you're typically going to pay about $20 to $25 in shipping. This thing was about $40, and then I paid $20 in shipping, which I know is kind of a rip. But at the end of the day, it's like I want to get this board as fast as possible because I want to test out x79. And this is what my channel is kind of built on, so I'm kind of just running with it. And so, to test inside of this motherboard, we are going to test my 64GB kit of RAM. I don't know if it's going to work or not. We're going to test out my 32GB kit of RAM. That should work. And we've got two different CPUs. This one, which is the one I kind of showed off in my last video, this is a i5 1620 V1. This is one of the cheapest quad-core overclockable CPUs I think I've ever seen. And that's the thing, is this thing is a quad-core, and we're going to be comparing it to x58 quad-cores because I can. I'll get some 6 cores in the future, but yeah, this is a quad-core. And then, on the other hand, we have an i5 2643 V1. This thing is a quad-core that runs at 3.3 gigahertz out of the box, and should turbo up to 3.5 all-core. So this thing was a little bit on the slower side, but I believe the CPU was about $12, which for an i7, essentially like a Xeon version of an i7, that's really not bad. And, I mean, 4 cores, 8 threads, running at 3.5 gigahertz all-core turbo. I mean, not great, but still not bad. Although the CPU that I'm really excited about is the 1620 V1, because I'm really hoping we're going to be able to get some kind of overclock with the 32 gigabytes of RAM and have some kind of stability. I don't know. Guys, I'm not counting on anything. I'm hoping, but not counting on anything. So let's put this thing into a system and see if it's going to work.
About 4 days ago. I got my x79 motherboard in. I had kind of teased about having the x79 CPU, and I actually got my CPU far before I got my board. I wanted just to throw it into a system and start messing around with it and start playing with it. So I did. I first built it on a box. I built it on a box and threw in my 1620, not a 1650, a 1620, and my 32 gigabyte kit of RAM, as well as connected some of my hard drives, put on a CPU cooler, yada yada yada. And I tried to run a Cinebench. And I got about 460 on Cinebench, but it was 460 something. And I thought that seemed very low, knowing the fact that a x5680 gets about 700 and I think like 720 on a Cinebench score, and the x5687, which is what I was going to originally compare this to, gets about a 620 on a Cinebench score. So when I saw a 400 on a 4-core, 8-threaded CPU that was newer, I started thinking that there's probably something wrong here. That's odd. So I tried to overclock it, and I was able to successfully overclock. I brought it all the way up to 4.1 gigahertz. And my Cinebench score dropped to 380. I kid you not, I have no idea. At that point in time, I had no idea what was going on, what was wrong, what was happening. I then decided I'm going to reinstall Windows, so I did that. I reinstalled all my programs, did that. I checked all my thermals, and I threw fans literally all over the motherboard to make sure nothing was overheating. I did that, and my Cinebench score was still like 380. And at that point in time, I was so confused. I dropped the overclock, and the score went back up to like 402. I don't know what happened. At that point in time, I didn't know what happened, but I was getting really frustrated. So I went to bed. The next morning, I went to work, got home from work, and I decided, you know what, maybe it's the 1620. The 1620 might be just a dead CPU. It might be a very bad CPU, something had happened, and that it simply cannot clock up, even though according to the Cinebench, or according to hardware monitor, when I was doing the Cinebench run, it was hitting the 4.1 gigahertz. But I don't know why. I don't know why the score was so low. So I swapped it over to the E5 the E5 2643. So I tried out that CPU and I ran a Cinebench, and it got 460 this time. So I was thinking, okay, so this is slightly better, but this is still bad. Just doesn't make any sense. So I then spent the rest of the night inside of the motherboard's BIOS trying to figure out what was going on. Was it that I wasn't giving it enough power limit? Was it that I wasn't allowing it to turbo properly? What is going on? Why are my Cinebench scores getting so low? I went to bed that night, frustrated, and thinking that maybe I just have a dead motherboard. Got up the next morning, went to work, got home from work, and I decided, you know, I never tested that kit of memory. This is the memory. It's registered ECC memory out of a Dell PowerEdge. I took this out and I put in 8 gigabytes of my Corsair XMS3 Platinum, 4 by 2 gigabytes each. And I got a Cinebench score on my E5 2643 of 570. When my Cinebench score went up over 100 points after switching out my crappy 32 gigabyte kit for an 8 gigabyte desktop kit, my mind was blown that it was finally acting the way that it should have been. Not to mention the fact that it was fully turboing, everything was working properly, and so I thought, you know what, it's probably ECC registered memory just puts the CPU into some kind of a limp mode. I wasn't able to find anything about that in the BIOS. I wasn't even able to find anything about anybody else saying anything like that. So then I decided to do something very, very dumb. I guess not very, very dumb, because there really was no risk involved. I know that this motherboard said in its description that it could only take up to 32 gigabytes. But I wanted to test out my 64 gigabyte kit. And as you can see where I'm pointing, it worked. Kind of. And I thought when I was going to put this in there, I knew that my kit worked because I had tried it, swapped out other memory. I knew for a fact it worked. And I figured it was going to put it back into limp mode. It didn't. When I put in my E5 2643, or I still had my E5 2643 in, Nolly, you're okay. And I ran the Cinebench score again. I went from 570 to 582. My Cinebench score increased by 12. When that happened, my mind literally melted. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, if I switch back to my 1620 and try for that 4.1 gigahertz overclock again, and if I was able to actually overclock to that number, I wonder what my Cinebench score would be. So I swapped the CPUs over. Cranked it up to 4.1, and I got a Cinebench score of 699 at 4.1 gigahertz, all 4 cores and 8 threads. At 699, that Cinebench score is knocking on the doors of an x5680 and destroys the x5687. Now, the x5687 was the original CPU that I was going to compare this thing to, but this thing knocks it out of the water. And I'm just going to say this right now. I'm amazed. This motherboard, like I said, it's cheap. It doesn't have USB 3. It only has one expansion slot. It's got a 16X and a 1X slot. It doesn't even have a 4X. And it doesn't have the adapter for an M.2 SSD. Or an M.2 NVMe SSD. So, I was kind of left with a motherboard that I didn't think was going to hold up very well. Yeah, at 4.1 gigahertz, because I was able, at 4.1, I was able to literally touch the VRM heatsink, and it wasn't all that hot. With the reverse airflow configuration that I currently have set up in the tower, it actually is cooling the VRMs enough to where I would willingly try to put a 1650 V2 in here just to see if I would be able to overclock the 1650 V2 to something like 4 gigahertz. But that's where this main point is going. I have 64 gigabytes of RAM in that tower, with an overclocked quad-core and a possible overclocked 6-core. Every single problem that I had with the X58 motherboard, well, not every problem, but most of the problems that I had with that X58 motherboard, the X58 Deluxe, I don't have with this thing. With the X79, now this is an x79g, I'm able to have ECC memory and an overclockable CPU without needing to compromise. That was one of the big things with the X58 motherboard, is either you had ECC registered memory or you had an overclockable CPU. You cannot use ECC registered memory with an unlocked X58 Xeon. It simply will not work. It was never enabled in the in the CPU's microcode. That's why the X56 series does have the ability to use registered memory. Well, the W36 series does not. And that's where the big divergence was between those two CPUs. And that's kind of where the problem lied for me when it came to X58. Going on to X79, there is no more problems. Well, hang on. Sorry, let me rephrase that. The overclocking and the amount of RAM that I have access to are no longer problems. It still has terrible built-in audio, literally just as bad as the X58 motherboard. It doesn't have any active cooling on the VRMs because this is one of the cheapest X79 motherboards you can possibly find. It does not have M.2 support. It only has that 1X1 slot, so either I would be able to use my sound card or upgrade to a USB 3 card, but I couldn't do both, and so I'm kind of stuck with USB 2 and obviously still keeping my sound card. And then the last kind of issue that I noticed with this motherboard is I have 64 gigabytes of RAM installed. Some programs say that I only have 32. Other programs say that I have 64. It doesn't seem to know which one it is. According to CPU-Z, I have 64 gigs in dual channel, running at 1600. And according to Sony Vegas 13, I only have 32 gigabytes of RAM installed, ready to go. And according to, 3D Mark Firestrike, I only have 32 gigabytes of RAM installed, ready to go. According to Intel's Extreme Tuning Utility, I have 64 gigabytes of RAM, ready to go. I don't know which it actually is, but let me just put it out like this. I have at least 32 gigabytes of RAM running at 1600, which is not the 2666 that it was on the X58 motherboard, which is the one kind of downside. If this was actually quad channel instead of its dual channel, it would blow X58 out of the water completely. But that really won't affect us in games, trust me. And it really won't impact a lot of the synthetics. The only thing that it's really going to impact is like render times when it comes to videos, because that's very memory intensive. But where it really just kicked the teeth in out of X58 was in load times, jitteriness, as well as overall snappiness. Guys, X79 isn't rocking, the PCIe 2.0. It's PCIe 3.0, as well as SATA 3. So while I'm sitting here not having USB 3, I have SATA 3 and PCIe 3, which means that my graphics cards perform better. Literally both my 980 Ti and my R9 290 both outperform what they otherwise would have on x58. And that's what I've got. I literally don't know what else to say. I'm going to do a lot more testing, and I'm going to actually just do a video just specifically on benchmarks. Today is just more going to be me talking about what I kind of learned from this whole little endeavor. But let me tell you guys, I'm dumbstruck by how fast this thing actually is. I feel like I'm using a significantly higher-end platform, and now I see why people were talking about how that transition from x58 to x79 was such a massive difference. Now, the whole weird thing about maybe 64, maybe 32 gigs of RAM doesn't really matter. Simply based on the fact that, well, you're not going to use 32 gigs of RAM, you're not going to use 64 gigs of RAM. You could probably get away with 16 with no issue. I'm going to do a test where I use 16 gigabytes of RAM in this motherboard with the CPU and just see how well it runs. But guys, the fact of the matter remains, even though this motherboard has a few more quirks and doesn't have USB 3, this thing outperforms x58 way more than what I thought it should. Now, I guess I shouldn't say outperforms. It really changed my opinion about newer platforms. Not necessarily because of higher frame rates, because the frame rates were maybe between like 2 and 8% faster, but not much. Really not much. And when it comes to actually like smoothness of these platforms, it blows my mind. It genuinely feels like I'm using a better system when using the x79 stuff, and I was not expecting that to be the case. But transitioning from x58 to x79, I think that I'm actually going to be turning this motherboard, this dinky little cheap motherboard, into my main rig. Now, like I said, the frame rates are not all that much better, and the only reason my frame rates are slightly better is because of probably the higher clock speed. But that's the thing, is assume that I don't overclock the CPU, and so they're both running at about 7 or 3.7 gigahertz to 3.8 gigahertz. The frame rate difference isn't really noticeable, but the frame time, it is noticeable. And especially if you're going above 60 hertz monitors. All three of my panels, as I talked about, are sitting at 75 hertz. And the gaming experience feels way more buttery smooth than what I thought it was going to. And I never even noticed it on x58. I noticed it a little bit, but not enough. And now I'm dumbstruck by this thing. And I've been rambling on for I've been rambling on for way too long about this, so I'm definitely going to cut things down. But, guys, stay tuned, because I'm amazed. I'm going to have to take my actual overclocking x58 hardware, being my Gigabyte G1 Killer Gorilla, and put that up next to this thing just to see what kind of frame rates and frame times, and really get a good analytical comparison between these two. But just from the get-go, I'm amazed. I'm genuinely amazed. So, thank you very much for watching. I know this was very much just a talking head video, but I will have actual synthetics in the next video. I will have a full suite of benchmarks. Today was actually my first day off in like 6 days. So, oh, Nala, you're okay. So, I will be doing a lot more stuff with this stuff in the very near future, and if my videos are a little bit farther apart than what they normally would be, I'm sorry, but, yeah. Welcome to the future. Evidently X79. Yeah. See you guys later. Peace.